just get started. So hello everyone and welcome. Just before we get started, a little bit about the format. If everyone could just keep their mics muted and save your questions for the Q&A section at the end, but feel free to post your questions in the chat as the panelists speak so you don't lose your train of thought. We only have an hour, so we're just going to jump right into it. So welcome to the fourth and last Pathways Career Panel, Fine Arts and Humanities. And my name is Bo Mompho. I am the Collections Manager and Head Registrar at the Davis Museum. Obviously moderating the panel. We have with us today three panelists with diverse careers representing corporate art, the nonprofit, and government. However, all three share an interest or backgrounds in the arts and humanities. So let's jump right into it, and we can begin by having the panelists introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their career path and current position. If we could start with Mee-Seen Loong, class of 1972, Miquel Geller, class of 2010, and then end up with Imani Higginson, class of 2014. Take it away, Mee-Seen.
Hi, I'm Mee-Seen Loong. I'm a specialist in Chinese art. In my long career in Chinese art, which spanned over 40 years, I was with Sotheby's from 1976 to 2018. And my roles at Sotheby's comprised of being the co-director of Chinese art in New York, the managing director of Sotheby's in Hong Kong, and finally, as vice chairman of Chinese art and Asian paintings worldwide. In 2018, I decided to stop working full-time at Sotheby's. So I joined as director a gallery based in Beijing called Ink Studio, which specialized in Chinese contemporary ink paintings. I've long been a groupie of Chinese ink paintings. And I met many, many artists, and I thought that here was a chance in the late stage to actually work closely with them. But first, I'd like to just go back all those decades to my early years at Wellesley. I was born and grew up in Kuala Lumpur and came to the States on an AFS scholarship, which took me to high school. And then I went home and returned to Wellesley. Now, coming from a third world country, if you were really smart, you were either a doctor, an engineer, or an accountant. So the rest of us spillovers had to wrestle what we wanted to do. When I arrived at Wellesley, I had a whole list of things I wanted to do. And I had a great foreign student advisor called Elizabeth Blake. And she sat me down and she had a list of courses she wanted to recommend. And I had my own list, Chaucer, Poli-Sci, Hobbit. And on her list was this thing called Art History 101. And I said, what's that? You know, being from a third world country, I've never heard of the discipline. And she said, looking at what you like and what you've done, I think that you might quite like it. Let us see. And so that began my interest in art history. And I still remember that very first day when the lights went down and Mrs. Vermeule appeared on stage and she struck her rod and the slides came on, and that was magic. So that was the beginning of a long interest in art history. So after Wellesley, I went on to do graduate work at Columbia, also doing art history. And I finished with a master's and came out, and fortunately, a few months after, landed at a job at Sotheby's as an administrator. So that began a few years of rather grueling work. I was eager to take any job I could find. So the job as administrator was a step in the door. But I soon told the director that I wanted to be more than that. I wanted to become a specialist. And he said, sure, but on your own time, baby. So I decided then that I would work what I had to do from 9 to 5, and after 5 o'clock, apprentice myself to one of the experts. So that began 5 years of 9 to 9 work, 6 days a week. because part of the training is sheer accumulation of data. And those years were hard, but really, I think that cramming all that in was very, very good for me. And I went on to be a specialist in Chinese art and joined the Chinese department, and then was sent to Hong Kong for 12 years to work in Sotheby's Hong Kong. And I came back in 2001, and I've been in New York ever since. So.
Thank you, Mee-Seen. Miquel, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Miquel Geller, class of 2010, and I went to Wellesley and was a studio art and French major. And I always knew that I was passionate about visiting museums and about art making. And I didn't see myself as an art historian, but I also felt that being a professional artist wasn't quite the right fit for me either. And one of my professors at Wellesley, Phyllis McGibbon, introduced me to the Davis Museum internship program, where I was very fortunate to have an opportunity to intern with Bo and be a print room monitor at the Davis Museum. And it instantly clicked for me that this was a role where taking care of art, this whole unknown world to me, would allow me to use these skills in understanding what materials are used by artists, art making processes, and so on, in a context that wasn't strictly historical and where I wasn't resolved to producing artwork myself. And from that point forward, I think I really had clearly decided that this was a good fit for me and that this is what I had wanted to do. So I continue to work for Bo in the print room at the Davis Museum. And then I went on to be the internship coordinator for the internship program for 2 years. And during that time, I also explored other interests, like getting a teacher certificate in elementary education and taking courses at Harvard Extension School in Museum Studies, and continuing just to look for any opportunity to volunteer with installations at the Davis Museum and just solidifying my interest in this field. From there, I went to get a master's degree in museum studies at Georgetown in Washington, DC. And then I pursued a number of different internships and project-based positions that were all really intentionally selected in collections management or registration. So I had positions at the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum, the Guggenheim, the MFA Boston, the 9/11 Museum, the Delaware Art Museum, and a few other museums, until I ultimately felt that I had all of these niche experiences that were related to collections management, but needed something that was broader to really get my foot in the door and begin my career. So I ultimately found a position at Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Northwest Arkansas, where I continue to work today, but I began as a part-time collections assistant, and through the past 5 years was promoted to an assistant registrar, and now I'm the associate registrar of collections at Crystal Bridges. So I'm the primary registrar for artworks owned by the museum in their permanent collection. I oversee our conservation programs and our outgoing loans. And it's just been a really exciting time to be at a museum that is emerging from being so new to really being a leader in the museum field, and looking towards expanding and so many great things.
Thank you, Miquel. I've written a lot of recommendations for Miquel, and her resume is quite impressive.
And I love that museum. It's a mecca for those of us who love Georgia O'Keeffe and Martin Heed, and I went there just to see those paintings. And we'll go again, COVID permitting.
Imani, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I graduated from Wellesley in 2014, and I was an art history major, and interned at the Davis my junior year at Wellesley, I believe, my junior year going into my senior year. actually transferred to Wellesley from another university. Amanda Gilvin was one of my TAs, like way back in my freshman year Renaissance and Baroque art course. And so I left Wellesley and knew that I did not necessarily want to pursue a PhD in art history or be kind of an academic art historian in that way. So I moved to New York City and did a couple of internships. I knew that my primary interest was in African American and African diasporic art. That's what I spent a lot of time studying at Wellesley. I took a lot of courses with Professor Nikki Green. And so I interned at a small art dealer specializing in African American art called Bill Hodges Gallery. And I also interned at Hauser and Wirth. That was a long time before Hauser and Wirth was like a big mega gallery that it is now. I think they represented 3 African American artists at that time. And through that, after a couple of months in New York, I found a job as an assistant at Swan Auction Galleries, which in 2006 was the first auction house to have specialized sales in African American art. And I worked there for a year and decided that maybe my path wasn't meant to be working in the art world. So I got a master's degree from Wake Forest in business. So it's a master's degree that's somewhat like, the closest thing I can think of is the first year of an MBA, and wound up getting a job at GSA, which is a government agency that does a lot of things, including acquisitions for all over the government. So it's joked about that GSA buys pencils for all over the government, but GSA also does like the Marine One acquisition and lots of other things, but also owns all of the buildings for the federal government. So I entered this 2-year program at GSA where you sort of were supposed to rotate throughout the agency and learn about different offices within GSA. And I naively did not know when I took this job that GSA manages a federal arts program called the Art and Architecture Program, which is a % for art program. And I worked in that office for a year. And it is the office that anytime a federal building is erected, there's set aside money for art. So the most famous and first acquisition of this program was the Alexander Calder flamingo sculpture in front of the Kluzinski Federal Building in Chicago. Commissioned, I think, in 1974. And so I worked on a variety of commissions in that year in that office and wanted to stay there, but I started working at GSA in 2016, which was the end of the Obama administration and the start of the Trump administration. And so there was a major hiring freeze across the federal government. So long story short, I now work in an assisted acquisitions office at GSA that works with agencies all across the government. So USAID, like Smithsonian, DoD agencies, OPM, to help them manage acquisitions that they want to make, ranging from like $20 million to $500 million. So I'm happy to talk about that range of experiences. Yeah, and happy to be here. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Imani. So we'll open it up to questions now. I have a question that I like to ask, actually, because it's one of those questions that I'm frequently asked. So I am often asked by students how can I get my foot in the door in terms of any organization that they would be interested in. So my response has often revolved around mentorship, internship, and networking. So can you speak to the role of those activities and how have they informed your career? And have any of those experiences parlayed into job opportunities?
Oh, I mean, should I answer Sas?
Sure, please.
Part of that, right? There are many ways of entering the field that I'm in, and of course, certainly the internship path is one of the most popular. So right now there are two levels. You can enter as an intern, and you work for a few months over the summer, and you work in different departments. Or there's a wonderful program called a traineeship, where every year 5 students are selected who are graduates of colleges, and they may have gone on to graduate programs, but not necessarily so. And those go through quite a rigorous interview process. And at the end of which they're offered a year's training at Sotheby's, and they're trained in all aspects of the art, whether they work, for example, in rotations in the shipping department, in the banking, the accounts department, or in a specialized field. So that, I think, would be the most coveted. And I know that sometimes it is hard to get in on the ground level, because one is impatient. You want to really be active, but there are just so many people now vying for positions in the art field. So you do have to be very, very patient. You can alternatively go right in at the middle, and that is get formal training at the advanced level, whether it be a master's degree or even almost a PhD, because then you can join a specific department as a trainee specialist or a full specialist. And we've had really wonderful people come over from the museum world who were previously directors of major museums, like our own Wellesley graduate Lisa Dennison, who was head of the Guggenheim, and she came into Sotheby's as a leading expert already there. And finally, I think that you can come in the best possible way, and that is my dream, come in as a collector. In other words, as a collector, you can also learn about the art, and you can get dozens of specialists who dream of coming to you and being a mentor of some sort. So many different ways.
And Mee-Seen, I'm curious about the internships at Sotheby's. Are they paid, or are they like mini internships, unpaid?
Well, absolutely. I think, I don't know when the regulations came into being, but they have to be paid internships. And not only that, there has to be a very special program for them. So it's not just drudgery work in the department, but you're taken to see collections, to visit clients, and so forth. So they're definitely paid internships.
Miquel, Imani, do you have anything to add to that?
I do. I think that networking has absolutely been instrumental in my career growth. I have tried to foster mentorship with many of the supervisors I've had in internships and positions, and just to try to collect as much information and learning from them as possible. And I've found that by staying in touch with those mentors, even with a simple gesture like a yearly card, to build and just continue this connection has been really important and meaningful to me. I now feel that many of these mentors are also friends, and they have helped me progress my career, both by offering me positions and as well as supporting me by writing letters of recommendation. But for example, I had an internship at the Cooper Hewitt Museum as a segment of my graduate school work. And later, after working at the Delaware Art Museum and the Guggenheim, I was then offered a termed position at Cooper Hewitt with that same supervisor. And so I think that it is absolutely so important to maintain those positive relationships. And, just if not for anything else, but for, happiness in your field, it's so important. So I think that's what I have to say.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I think I would also just add, I just think being honest about your interest with people you know has really helped me, who may not even, I didn't even think I knew anyone who was connected with the art world. I actually got my job at Swan through, I was at home in Amherst and ran into someone, a family friend in a coffee shop, and said I was applying for this job, and oh my gosh, living in New York is such a struggle, and they wound up knowing someone who worked at Swan. So I think just being very honest about your interest, and I mean, not, and sort of forging meaningful connections with people, but being clear about what your career goals are can be interestingly helpful.
It's amazing the way I can't. I'm terrible with these phrases. What 7 degrees of separation? Did I get the number right? I'm not quite sure. But the networking opportunity, you just never know who knows who knows who that could finally end up connecting you with that dream job you have. So, some people don't have, it's difficult, if you don't have the personality to kind of an extroverted personality, we reach out and start networking. But I feel like in these days and times, that's so important, more so I feel than sometimes your qualifications, because if you're a known entity, that speaks so much more. People want to know who they're working with, not just someone who's an expert in the field. So I would just, reiterate that the importance of networking and building relationship in the field as you move forward. So Ari has a question. I'm not quite sure who it's directed to, but anyone can pick it up. Can you think of something you wish you knew before entering the field? Mee-Seen, I'm going to pick on you.
Oh, there's so many things I didn't know then. I just went into it because I was just so in love with the field. In fact, I was being very exploratory, and I took so many different courses, and I was taking political science courses, language courses, and so forth. And one day, one of my classmates over Wednesday's gracious tea said to me, we had those tea times every Wednesday where we could converse and so forth. She said, you've taken so many art history courses. Why aren't you an art history major? So I said, oh my God, you're so absolutely right. So there was second term of my junior year. I got up and ran to my advisor's office and said, I'm changing my my major. She said, I've been waiting, and so forth. So anyway, but what I like to say is that I wish I had known then that that there would be time later on to pursue the career you want to pursue. But the college years is a time when you can do so much, you can learn so much. And I wish I had known then that there would be that flexibility, because all I did was just concentrate on my field of interest, and I didn't take any courses in music, which I should have. And I regret that. I regret not being so well rounded. However, what I like to say is that if I knew then what I know now, I know now that language is very, very important. And to the people who are starting out now, aside from getting a whole range of courses to take, one practical piece of advice is this, and I hope I'm not too far off, and that is make yourself learn Chinese, because in the art world, that's where the market is right now. And whether you go into finance, or you go into art, or you go into any other form of career, the language is very important. And this is just a practical piece of advice. Learn Chinese.
That's good. My son's taking Mandarin.
Yes.
Miquel, Imani, do you have anything to add to that question?
I would add that just skills and learning in areas that I never would have expected to benefit me in this career have been hugely helpful. And so I think that when I was pursuing my career, I was very narrow-minded and really intentional about studying what I was going to study, making sure it was related to this career. And while I think that was very good, I also wish that, similar to I think what Mee-Seen was saying as well, that I wish I had just followed what I was interested in, because so many different interests have come to play in ways that I never would have imagined, and so many different skills that I weren't so intuitive to me as being related to a position in a museum have been incredibly useful to me. I've learned so much about buildings and how they're engineered, for example, and so many skills that aren't as much about knowing necessarily facts about how to take care of a particular type of artwork, but are more based in how to make good decisions and measure risk. And so I think that just a diversity of interests and a diversity of skills and knowledge is critical.
Yeah, I want to add to that. So whatever you do after you finish, whatever program you go into, the very fact that you use those years to make yourself an interesting, complex person, and that helps so much in whatever career you want to pursue, because it makes it so much more interesting to your colleagues and to your clients, because here you are, a whole being. And I find that I wish I could go back and take more courses.
It's never too late.
For some.
Are there any questions from anybody in the audience? Okay. I have a question, another question. What about, I mean, since this panel is geared towards students who are considering their future, what advice would you share with students as they try to determine if a potential career pathway is a good fit for them? What do they need to consider, and what should they be asking themselves?
Shall I try? If you're considering a career in art history, very fortunately, there are so many avenues now in that particular direction, because you can go into museum work, you can go into gallery work, you can go into management, you can go into insurance, finance, shipping, or you can go into an auction house. But the thing is, you have to remember that things may not always turn out the way you want to be. So within, say, the auction world, which I know, there are many, many different departments you can consider. But the one thing that I've done is I've pursued the path of being a specialist. And I think that that is a very, very interesting career choice. At least I think so, because you're never, ever going to be bored. There's just so much to learn. I spent the first few years of my career being absolutely terrified because I knew so little and be confronted by people who would ask me difficult questions. But the thing is, as you go along and you accomplish the first few years of that work, and you know you're suited for it because you love the art, you love being around beautiful things, you're a very personable person, and you like your clients and so forth. But there are certain barriers, and some people might come to the crossroads where you don't know whether you want to go into other aspects of the art, because there's one thing which is not often known. You can learn about art, you can accumulate information and expertise, and you can go very, very far. But at a certain level, something else kicks in, and that is the eye. You can cultivate the eye, but you can't cultivate it totally. It is something which is there or not. Some people have a natural knack for it. So at that point, you can decide if you want to continue trying to be the top expert in the field, or you can go into management, which brings a lot more money, and go into other aspects of the business, like managing people who collect art or who have the money to spend. But first of all, just follow your instincts. If you love the art and you think you can bear the years of tedium, I would go for it.
So Mee-Seen, I've done a little stint at an auction house during my career at Butterfield and Butterfield, which no longer exists. I'm a little curious about, you know, for those who study art history, you know, whether they choose to go, say, into the museum field or the gallery or auction house, which is, you know, corporate. Are there opportunities for them to be creative, or is it mostly about sales?
Oh, I think that you would sort of die on a vine if you weren't creative. And I strongly advocate, as you go along in those careers, that you have another life, you know, pursue your hobbies. So many of my colleagues actually are quite artistic. So therefore, on the side, they would continue taking courses in fine art and so forth. I have silly little hobbies that I pursued all these years just to keep my mind, alive, because it's not always going to be business. And in the museum world, you can be so creative because you always have extraordinary exhibitions to mount. And early in my career, that was my dream, to be a museum curator. But when I was in graduate school, I realized that I really didn't have the discipline to go through all those years. As I was told, it was going to take another 10 years to a PhD. So therefore, certain people with that kind of discipline can do it, but always, always be creative. I think that's part of being in the arts, that not only are you working in the art, you yourself remain creative.
But I guess what I was trying to get at is that, you know, if you're a specialist at Sotheby's and have a PhD, you know, whereas in museum, you are curating, you're putting these shows together. There's not, maybe I'm wrong, but there doesn't seem to be that same opportunity within an auction house, or is there?
Yes and no. I don't think you have the traditional opportunities to create certain shows, but you can be very inventive and go into fields that no one has ever thought of before. And that in itself, quirky as it sounds, may be quite interesting. For example, there's a whole field now in selling major sneakers. Who would have thought? So someone came up with that, and that's creative.
Okay, Hannah wants to know what your hobbies are that you referenced.
Okay, every year I buy white pumpkins and I paint them with dots in Kusama style. And then last year, because of COVID, when I was all hemmed in, what I did was I went walking along around Central Park, and I collected ginkgo nuts, competing with all those Chinese old ladies from Chinatown. And I gathered those nuts, dried them, bottled them, and gave them to friends. So it became a little cottage industry. But aside from that, I like to make summer puddings, and I decorate them with flowers. So anything that is both consumable and visual. And every year I have a new hobby.
Let's see. I've lost track of my questions. See if everyone's answered them. I think Miquel, Imani, did you have any input on that question I asked about advice to students trying to determine a career path that fits with their interests?
I was just going to say, I think it's not well communicated to students doing their undergraduate degree that there's a vast number of careers that one could have in the art world.
Yes.
I think so. While I was working at GSA in this art and architecture program, there was one person who was responsible for cyclic maintenance for all of these works indoors and out of doors. And that was not a job that I knew existed in the art world. So I think there are just a range of things that you could be doing. I don't think necessarily you can think outside of the box of being a curator or something. There's a lot of options.
Great, thank you. Caroline has a question which I'm going to pose to Imani. How do you reconcile real life issues, finance, mental health, racism, and I'm going to add in their family, because Miquel, you could address that, with the reality of the field? Is it a love for the material and work? Is a love for the material and work enough to stick through a bad job?
I can go. I say this as someone who's, I think introductory jobs in the art world are tough. It's not, I don't think it's probably news to most of the people here. It's hard. I remember very, very long days and oftentimes things that you don't want to be doing. But I think for me, the exposure to all sorts of artists and different types of artwork that I had never seen was really, really very interesting to me. And knowing that I don't think that you should stick with a bad job, but also knowing that you can participate in the art world in whatever way you kind of see fit, even if it isn't through your job. If you feel things aren't working out for you, I think that's fine too. I think also starting salaries in art jobs are not always livable wages in places like New York City. And so that's additionally something to consider.
Miquel, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, because I happen to know that Miquel turned down a wonderful job offer for various reasons. So I think this question kind of would be good for you to answer, Miquel, in terms of how you balance specifically family life and the choices you make in terms of your career path.
Sure. Yes, I did recently have an opportunity to relocate back to the East Coast. And it was an incredibly agonizing and difficult decision, because it would have allowed me to work with a former mentor and someone who I admired very deeply. But ultimately, there were so many factors that can be abstract when you're applying for a job and you don't know at that time what the offer you'll actually be presented with will be. And so as a mother with a new kindergartner, as well as a toddler, understanding the relationships and that we've set up here for their lives with doctors and schools and so on, it became a decision for me about what was most important, and that is all part of job alignment and fit. There were many aspects that were the right fit, but I think maybe still, the most perfect opportunity may still be out there. It's complicated.
And I want to go back to a little bit what Caroline was talking about, in the sense that, work is very political. I've been very fortunate to work with wonderful people, both who supervise me and whom I supervise, and that makes all the difference in the world, really. Who wants to stay in a position where you're just miserable? And at a certain point, you have to tell yourself, is it really worth it? And in the here and now, that can be a really difficult decision. And it's just, your future looks so bleak, you're leaving this job. But as Mee-Seen has referenced, you look back 10 years, 15 years from now, it's a blip in your life, right? So you just have to look forward and just stay positive and just look for opportunities and network. I hope that helps, Caroline.
I think that in the current current era, when there's just so many technological tools that you can have, whether it be the Zoom event or whether it be technology, digital things, so much more can be accomplished. In the dark ages when I was starting out, we didn't even have fax machines. And then I was so excited when I got my first IBM Selectrix 2, which weighed a ton. And there was so little that you had to mimeograph things. So in other words, technology is going to help all art history careers.
But Mee-Seen, I wonder how, I'm different generation and you're a different generation, how things have changed. I feel like, I feel like now, say a master's degree is almost required in these days for every job. And when I started working, the hands-on experience was just as important, right? But I feel like less so now, especially if you don't have the opportunity to kind of showcase yourself in an internship or, to someone if you send out your resume and there's not that master's degree on there, I feel like it's not, you're not even in the pool because there's so much competition out there. And it just like, I feel like the field has changed. I mean, especially the museums field, it's become more professionalized. And the incorporation of technology, when I started in the field, museum databases were just getting started. Now it's like, what I would do, if I had to go back in terms of my field, would probably be, but would focus more on computers actually, because that's just an invaluable tool, that type of skill set, especially in my specific area of museum work, which is registration, collection. It's all about, I spend 90% of my time on the database.
Yeah, I totally agree about the computer system. But on another aspect of changes is that when I was starting out, I was in an old boy network world, and it was very, very tough as a woman and also as an Asian woman to break those barriers. But things happen and it worked. And nowadays, I think that's a much more level playing field. And I'm very happy about that. I see so many different women in every aspect, even being furniture experts, which you didn't think was possible. You had to lift so much. So it's a different world and it's good.
Mee-Seen, I have a question directed to you from Ari. And as a person from another country, do you feel like your background shaped your experience?
Yes, I think so, very, very much so. Though when I was growing up in Malaysia, in a multinational country, I really wasn't as aware of my Chinese background as I did. And I learned all that when I was taking history and art courses at Sotheby, not Sotheby's, at Wellesley and later on at Columbia. So it was really strange to discover my own background identity when I arrived in the United States. I mean, it wasn't there when I was growing up. So what shaped me was actually my college and graduate school years. Oh, I might add though, which is not to say that I would abandon the education I had growing up, because I went to the Methodist girls and boys school, and we had Bible classes every day. So that was an advantage, because when you're doing art history, you have to know those stories. Nothing was lost.
All right, we've got another question. Oh, sorry. Corinne, Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. And thank you to all the panelists. As a senior art history major, these panels are very helpful and wonderful to listen to. I have a question for Imani about the decision to kind of take a career pivot. It sounds like you kind of went back into the art world, but your decision to pursue a master's in business and kind of taking that leap to deviate from that path that you'd set yourself on.
Yeah, that's a good question. I get asked that a lot. I think part of it was actually working at an auction house. I hadn't done anything in the business field, but actually working in the auction house industry, and Mee-Seen can probably give a broader background on that. We were actually very involved in the business aspects of what we were doing, and I mean, customer service is a major part of the auction house world, and I was interested in developing those skills. And I was also in some ways very conflicted by what we were doing at Swan with African American art. I mean, that could be a whole Zoom session on African American art and the auction house world. So I just thought the opportunity for a change that would give me more information and on business, and with the kind of unknown of, do I go back to an art career or do I do something else? I think it was a worthwhile experience. And I learned a lot working there and got to see a lot of really incredible art, but was also very frustrated by a lot of things, like the the valuation of African American art and artists is very frustrating. It's changed massively since that time, even in the last, my goodness, in the last few years, for a lot of reasons. I think the museum and cultural institutions having more exhibitions by African American artists and focused on African American art, massive sales. And I think the portraits of our former First Lady Michelle Obama and President Obama has changed the landscape of African American art so much. And so I think what I was doing in 2014 would be completely different than what it is now.
It's a very exciting field right now.
Yeah.
Mee-Seen, I know you probably mentioned it a little bit in your introduction, but along the same line, you were at Sotheby's for 40 years. Yes. Tell us a little bit about the decision to leave and to move on to something, I mean, new. Not quite new, there's a common thread there, but certainly to leave an institution you've been with for 40 years.
Yeah. It's really hard to leave a company that you consider family. But after a while, after 40 or 43 years, actually, things do get same old. But all along, when I was working in the field of Chinese art, especially in ceramics, I befriended a group of artists in the early 80s, and I sort of grew up with them. And when it came time to help them, I thought this was the best possible time. So a gallery approached me about representing living artists. And also I was approached because they knew that I had very strong ties with some of the great artists in ink paintings today. So therefore, I find that it's a wonderful thing to be able to do now, to nurture living artists. And so what I do is not just represent them in art fairs and gallery exhibitions, but I try to get them to museums. And I'm working with various museums in doing special exhibitions for very prominent artists. And I find that so invigorating, because you recognize the talent and you promote it. And I want to see that art go to good collectors. So you're a custodian, you are transferring that love, and hopefully someone else will take it on. So that was not a difficult decision at the end of 40-something years. I just wish more people were as addicted to buying art as I am in my small paltry way. So I always tell people, spend beyond your means, but just spend.
And you had mentioned a little bit about the internship program at Sotheby's. I'm wondering, you must have seen a lot of interns move through the program. What qualities makes a particular intern the most successful? I don't know if you followed any of them throughout their careers, but who are the ones that stand out? What are the qualities that make them stand out from their peers and make them successful?
Yeah. I think that I have followed quite a few of them. And number one, the best ones came with very good preparation in either art history or some other field. They were very, very precise and competent in their chosen area. And number two, they were all very enthusiastic about art. Number three, they worked very hard and were very, very savvy with technology. Number 4 or 5, they had great personalities. They were people, and that's a very, very important aspect. And they were prepared to work very hard, and that was also a very critical factor. And above all, most of them had prodigious memories. They could remember data, they could remember people, and they had great language skills. So all of those people have gone on to different museums, or they've gone back to successful banking, gone on to banking careers where they incorporate art into what they do. But for the most part, all of those things, expertise, discipline, persistence, personality, language skills. And you have that in Miquel and Imani.
Okay. Let's see. Before we're coming up to our 1 hour, and I wanted to know if everyone on our panelists can give the last word of advice to our audience here before we sign off. What would that be?
Anyone else want to go ahead first?
I think I would just advise to take advantage of any opportunity that comes your way, to be yourself, because things about you will be interesting and help you succeed in unexpected ways, and to persist. And I think that there won't be a wrong decision. There had been moments where I was deciding between one offer or another, and I think that either way it will work out. It's all going to work out.
Yes, I think persistence and using, I mean, we've touched upon this a little bit, but there is a vast network of Wellesley alumni in the art world, and who you can utilize beyond this panel, and just persistence and understanding your own values and how that fits into the work you're doing. I think you will be successful no matter what you do.
Yes, I agree. I think that the key is to explore all the things that are available to you, especially when you're young and you're learning. But one thing I would like to say is that growing up Asian, I was always taught to be deferential. And that's one thing I would like to say, that you can be deferential, but you also have to be principled, and you do have to be true to yourself, and you have to be assertive. So therefore, use those tools that you have, because if you have that confidence and that training, you can make changes, you can convince people. But above all, I think through all the things that you have to do, all the turmoil, just enjoy yourself. And I think it's important to have fun. And I think I managed to sneak some of that in because I was in New York City. I went to the ballets, went to theater, and there was just so much food around. And I just, want others to know that there's time to do it later. Just enjoy yourself when you're young.
So I do have one last question. I'm going to try to phrase it. Someone in the audience wants to know how you can, as you're applying for a job and you're marketing yourself, you don't have a lot of experience, yet there's this, job, this dream job you have. How can you market yourself so that you're a viable candidate, even if you don't quite have all the qualifications that is listed on the job description? Any advice on how to navigate that? Should she not do it? Should she do it?
I think it all comes down to personality and enthusiasm, because once that person can relate to you, that goes a long way, because you want to have people you enjoy being around, and other things can be learned. But that part of yourself, that personality, you have it. So just bring it up.
And I have to agree, I go back to the networking, right? So maybe you don't look like the perfect candidate on paper, but if you have that opportunity to meet that person who's interviewing and you have the right personality, the right fit, that will go a long way. And that's the hardest part is getting that opportunity to speak with someone. And that, again, is really where networking comes in. And I find that nowadays, job descriptions are written for the ideal candidate, and the people who write them don't expect all those check marks, all the candidates to meet all those check marks. The personality plays a huge part, and I feel a lot of people underestimate themselves. So, if you're interested in a job, you're not going to get it if you don't apply. So there's no harm in applying. They'll have your name, and if you get that wonderful opportunity to interview, you'll be a known quantity.
I would agree with that. I think that as an applicant, it isn't your job to decide if you're qualified. It's the hiring manager's job to decide that. Your job is just to apply. And I would also say that something unexpected could happen. Maybe this opportunity doesn't pan out, but now you've met that person, and in the future, you may be thought of for another position that is a better fit for you.
And the one thing I would say is reach out. You have to be proactive. Pick up that phone and use an excuse of, can I talk to you more about this position that I'm really interested? Use it as an information, set up an information meeting. That way you have this opportunity to have this one-on-one meeting with this person. So I would, be proactive. Just don't reach out to the people you're interested in, the organizations you're interested in working for. All right, we are at 5:03. Does anyone have any last questions? Okay.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, I want to thank the audience for their very great questions, for the panelists for their time, and special thanks to Destiny, Barletta, and Nikki, who, there she is, hey Nikki, Berlin, for co-organizing these panels. And if you have questions for the panelists, feel free to send them to Destiny, Nikki, or myself, and we will forward them along. Otherwise, thank you for your time, and stay safe.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Many thanks. Many thanks for moderating too.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bo.
You're welcome.